You're watching Voiceover. How did you do it? At voiceoverpodcast.com, where we talk to seasoned, successful voice actors to find out how they did it. I'm your host, Ian Kleinfeld, and you can find me at voicebyian.com. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at voicebyian. Hi, Kira. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you very much for making the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I got my coffee.
Yeah. What is it? 1 o'clock over there. So
Yeah.
you get the afternoon coffee, you get started, get ready to get going. That's awesome. So, what are you working on these days?
Um, I'm mostly just doing a lot of games, dubbing, a little original animation. Things have obviously been kind of crazy just with the whole transitioning to recording from home.
Oh yeah,
I'd say we have a pretty good system going on now, but every studio uses something different and sometimes they switch it up. So, it's kind of like a little different format with different places that I work with. And it takes a lot of getting used to and a lot of kind of learning technological stuff at the last minute.
yeah. Especially for people who are primarily actors and not techies like me.
Right.
Yeah. So I have a little bit of both. So it wasn't very hard to just kind of pick up all the technical stuff. I'm a programmer by trade.
Oh, nice. So you
Yeah.
probably transitioned easily.
Yeah. Well, I actually started during COVID. So
Oh.
I did it originally back in 1990 something for like a year, and then maybe it was like the late 90s, and then the dot-com crash happened and I was unemployed, and I just kind of forgot about all of it for a while. And then just in the middle of COVID, I was like, you know what? I need to start doing that again. I really miss that.
Yeah,
So
it's fun. I feel like it's kind of like when you're really passionate about doing voiceover, you kind of don't want to do anything else with your life.
yeah, I'd rather not. Yeah. I mean, I'd rather not do anything else with my life, but I got to get there first.
Yep. I've had so many jobs.
Yeah. Um, so let's see. Anything in particular that's fun that you're working on that you can talk about?
Well, there is a really cool fighting game that I worked on that will be coming out pretty soon here called Phantom Breaker Omnia. I play a
Uh-huh.
character named May, and she is a pink haired idol, which I feel is very, very fitting for my brand.
Huh, I wonder why.
And then I was in a game that I keep promoting because more people need to play it and check it out, and it's super cool. It's called 13 Sentinels. I play a character named Ryoko. There's all these different like story paths with the different characters, and I just think she was such an interesting character. And it was also, I think, the first full game that I recorded from home once the pandemic started. So
Oh, wow.
that was really interesting, and I'm glad that we were able to make it work as well as we did.
Nice. Okay, well, definitely 13 what?
13 Sentinels.
13 Sentinels. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then what was the name
It's
of the
got
other
like
one?
mechs and stuff. And the other one is called Phantom Breaker Omnia.
Phantom Breaker Omnia. Just easily rolls off the tongue. Yeah, and I noticed you had just a few IMDb credits. I think only 260. So lots of games and lots of anime. That's really great. Um, so let's talk about your journey here. What were you doing before you were doing VO, and how did you get into it?
Well, I first started that, or I first decided that I wanted to be a voice actor when I was 16. When I actually started working for pay is another story, but before that, I knew that I wanted to be a performer, but I was more focused on music.
Uh-huh.
So as a teenager, I was like, I really want to be in a rock band. And that was my whole goal. And, of course, my family was like, that's not a very realistic goal. I know it's what you want to do, but
Uh-huh.
you should probably think of something else. So I didn't know what I was going to do for like my actual career.
Uh-huh.
Um, and there were a few things like I liked acting. So I had taken some theater classes here and there, nothing too serious or in depth, but I knew that I liked kind of performing and acting, but I
Mhm.
didn't really want to be on camera. And I mean, being on stage was kind of fun. Like I liked, singing and stuff like that. But I also didn't really like writing my own songs. I liked performing other people's work, and I liked performing vocally more than like physically, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like all this stuff that when I found out about voice acting, it just made perfect sense as like, this is what I want to do. Um,
Uh-huh.
because I think like when you're younger, you don't, if you watch a cartoon or something, you don't
Right.
really think about how there's people employed to do the voices. You're just kind of like, it's just like the characters talking. Like you're not, on
Exactly.
some level
Yeah.
that there's a person doing it, but it's just not like something that you think about. So, at the time, I knew somebody who was showing us these like flash animations that she had worked on as
Uh-huh.
a voice actress. And I was like, wait, how do you do that? Because I grew up in Alaska. So obviously there weren't really opportunities for acting work except for
Right.
like, like school plays, that kind of stuff. So,
Right.
I had asked her how she got into it. And she's like, oh, there's just like online communities and stuff. You just record your voice on your computer and you audition for projects. And, at the time I was also kind of getting into like consuming video games and anime. So it was kind of
Mhm.
making more sense like, oh, yeah, there's people who do this. Like, I want to do this and stuff. You know, I
Mhm.
think it was like, when you're living in an area that's more remote from that kind of stuff, you kind of know that it's not really realistic to do that kind of stuff for a long time. But then when I found out
Yeah.
that people did it as a hobby, people just did it on the internet and their work was shown on like, flash animation sites. This was before YouTube, so YouTube wasn't really a thing yet. But yeah, I just wanted to start auditioning for stuff like that. So I joined like hobby forums back
Uh-huh.
in the day because that's where a lot of this stuff was going down. And back then it was just stuff that we all did for fun. I think there were still maybe like pay to play sites that were kind of starting up back then. I'm not really
Right.
sure, but obviously it's like none of us had the equipment. This was before it became like easy to get pro
Right.
grade equipment in your home, right? So now it's
Right.
like we all have booths. Like I even see more like hobby or entry level voice actors who have a booth and they have like kind of fancy equipment and audio interface and all that. But back then it was like people
Right.
just used whatever like because it wasn't
Yeah.
easy to get like even a USB condenser back then. I think that was kind of before the advent of that kind of stuff. So
Do you
people
remember
just
Joe Cartoon?
sounds familiar.
He's the
Yeah.
one who had the hamster and everything, like hamster in a microwave, hamster in a blender, hamster in a, everything like that. Creepy hamster. No, doesn't ring a
Sounds maybe a little familiar. I'm not sure.
He was one of the first flash animation guys who was really big. I remember him from the late 90s, early 2000s when I was working in a .com and you were mentioning, and I guess you started around, what was it, 2004, I think?
Yeah, that's when I started.
So he might have been sort of on his way into history at that point, I guess. 4 years is a long time on the internet,
Yeah.
even back then. Anyway, so you're in Anchorage, Alaska, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you
that's where
were.
I grew up. Yeah.
Yeah, not currently. Currently, you're in LA. But I mean, speaking in the present tense, so you're in Anchorage, Alaska, and you're thinking about all this stuff, and
Yeah, and I was, like a teenager still and all that kind
yeah,
of stuff. So I didn't really have a realistic view of the industry at the time. I was just like, I want to be an anime and video games because that's where like a lot of
yeah,
people start. And you don't really realize that character work doesn't pay very well, especially
uh-huh,
anime. So, but it's like that wasn't even a concern. I'm like, I just want to do it. So, I
right,
was doing all this like hobby stuff. And of course, my first auditions were terrible, even for just these like passion projects that no one was
right,
getting paid for. And I think sometimes people feel discouraged if they decide they want to start doing this and then they audition for some small like YouTube video that's just for fun and they don't get cast. And it's like, no, like
yeah,
you're not going to be good when you first start.
yeah.
I don't even think if you take any of the really great legendary voice actors who everybody looks up to, I bet they weren't good when they did their first auditions. It's like it's a
I
new
would love
territory
to
for
hear that.
people. I
I would
know.
love to
It's
hear
I
like
don't know.
Dave Fenoy's, first auditions, right?
Right?
So
So,
yeah,
yeah, I just kind of kept doing that. I kind of learned to make my own projects, just like basic audio mixing and just put these like little projects together that I
mhm.
made. And, it was kind of like a slow journey, just sort of trying to audition for all these like online animations and different projects.
Where did you find your auditions back then?
There used to be a site called the Voice Acting Alliance. It's
Uh,
not around anymore. It hasn't been for a number of years, But back in the day, that's kind of where a lot of people would go to. And it's funny because a lot of my colleagues in the anime industry now used to be on that site as well. And
Oh,
so
how
it's kind
fun.
of cool. Like,
Uh-huh.
obviously, I won't out anybody, but, it was really cool that a lot of us kind of started there and then eventually did stuff for real.
That's pretty awesome. And now you have the site Voice Actors Group, right?
Voice acting club.
Voice Acting Club, right. I'm on
And the
there, I
fun
didn't
thing
know.
about that,
Yeah.
yeah, the first iteration of the voice acting club actually started way back on Newgrounds in like 2005.
What's Newgrounds?
Because Newgrounds, yeah, I keep forgetting. I'm probably showing my age with a lot of this stuff, but Newgrounds was like the biggest flash animation website. It was kind of like before YouTube and Vimeo and all that kind of stuff. Newgrounds was where like independent content creators would go and upload their animations.
Uh-huh.
Um so it's basically, yeah, it was flash animation. People would do everything from like just ridiculous video game parodies to like, hey, I'm making a full on cartoon series and all
Uh-huh.
this kind of stuff. And I think when I was doing it, it was before content creation was like super monetized the way it
Right.
is now. So it was just sort of like people collaborating and helping each other out. I didn't get paid for any of the stuff that I did back in the day. I don't think most of the creators got paid in the early days. Later on, they worked out a system so that, the creators could get paid and stuff. But, back then it was just kind of like, people making projects together, having fun.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like I got kind of lucky just because I was one of the few voice actresses at the time who targeted that site.
Uh-huh.
Because obviously, there were sites that were focused on voice acting and people would post their projects there. But I would actively go and like contact animators that I wanted to work with and stuff. And, a lot of times people just didn't really think about voice acting when it came to Flash. So most of the times the creators would just do their voices themselves.
Mhm.
And if it came to female characters, a lot of times, if it was like a male animator, they would just pitch up their own voice or like, make their mom record it or something like that. Or they'd use like the text to speech voices. That was a big
Right.
thing
"Hey,
back then.
mom, come here."
Yeah, yeah. So I think, just kind of being like, hey, I'm a girl who can do voices and here's my crappy homemade demo, because back then on like in that kind of community, it's
Yeah.
like nobody cares if your demo's not great or if it's amateur. It's just kind of like, oh cool, like you're willing to do this creative service to help me out and it'll get you a publicity and vice versa or whatever.
Mhm.
So, especially if a flash got front page, that was the big thing. Like if you could be in a flash that got front page, it was like,
Uh-huh.
oh wow, like 100,000 people saw this. It was really cool.
And is that site Newground, is that around anymore or no?
I'm actually not sure because I heard that Flash Player isn't like it doesn't
Oh,
even
that's right,
exist
it's not even
anymore as of
supported.
recently.
Yeah, it's
So
barely
I know a
supported.
lot of the stuff, like people preserved the old flashes on like YouTube and uploaded them and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
So I think a lot of the content from back then is still around, especially if it was something big. I'm just not sure like if the site is still active.
Okay, interesting. Very cool. So new ground and getting into that, and how did you transition that into, more professional, voice acting?
So one of the big things that I think helped me a lot, and it's going to sound really small and kind of silly, but it's something that I think is so important. And it's one of the reasons why I always tell aspiring voice actors and beginner voice actors how important this is. When I was in college, I didn't major in anything related to acting. I ended up majoring in languages.
Mhm,
So, I didn't really do anything with that. But I did take like a theater like acting class because
mhm,
obviously there wasn't any voice specific kind of stuff, but I was like, well, I'll take acting. And I had done a few private lessons with my acting teacher.
mhm,
And I would do some scripts for her and stuff, and she's like, okay, well, you can do all these voices, which is great, and you have this big vocal range, and you can do all this kind of stuff, and you can sound like these other characters and that. But she's like, the very core of it is acting. Like if I don't believe what you're saying, then how are you gonna convince the audience that you're
mhm.
this character, so it was kind of like, it's something that sounds so no brainer, especially now with how much information is available on the
Right,
internet and all that kind of stuff. But it was like, wow, like the most important part of voice acting isn't the voice part, it's the acting part. So
right.
that was like a big revelation when I was 19, 20, whatever.
Sure.
And um, I also, because I was still living in Alaska, I had obviously followed some stuff regarding the industry and I knew that I wanted to work in like anime, video games, that kind of stuff. And I
Uh-huh.
was still doing like a lot of hobby work online. And at the time, a studio that I work with a lot now called Bang Zoom Entertainment was
Uh-huh.
holding a voice acting contest. And, now I know we look at contests as like really gimmicky and it doesn't really like matter whether somebody wins a contest or not because there's so many factors
Mhm.
that go into it. But at the same time, I was like, I really, really want to win this contest because I want these casting directors to notice me. And, then when I eventually move to LA, maybe I can be in projects or whatever. So I studied with that acting teacher with some private lessons because for the audition we had to prepare a monologue that was like from that type of media. So
Uh-huh.
I just like transcribed one from the Japanese version of a show and practiced it with her and she would give me feedback and I was basically like I want to win this so like coach me on this and don't hold back kind of thing.
Mhm.
So I flew, it was in Long Beach, California at the time, and I flew out to the event where they were doing the contest. And, some of my other friends from the online communities were in it and stuff. And it's interesting because one of the other actresses who competed that year is now one of my industry colleagues, and she's in a ton of stuff. So it's just kind of cool seeing how,
Fun.
how much everybody grows. But
What was
yeah,
what was your monologue from?
the Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Definitely going to sound like a weeaboo, but you know,
Yeah.
I just totally owned it. Like I dressed up as the character, like I fully committed and everything. And so I did the monologue and then, they do something where it's like a cattle call where they have everybody in the room participating and everyone goes up and reads their monologues for the judges, which are like voice directors, casting
Mhm.
directors, just like people who work on that side of the industry.
Right.
And they picked, I don't know if it was like 5 people, 6 people, something like that, who would then go to the final round, which was like the one that was, you know, open for people to watch, like the one that was on the stage and stuff. And that was like the big scary thing. And I was like, oh, I want to make it. And, I felt pretty good because obviously when you have a contest like this, you have some people who are super hardcore dedicated, as I was, and some of the other people who later became my colleagues were. But then you have a lot of people who maybe haven't been serious about studying acting yet and they're just kind of like, I want to try this out for fun, so I'm going to enter this contest. And of course
Mhm.
there's like absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like that's awesome, it takes a lot of courage to get up there and do that. But I think it probably helped just that I had had some acting training and I'd had practice by that point.
Mhm.
So when I made it to the next round, like the big boy round, I was like, yes, I
Mhm.
did it. It's like I'd been really hoping for that, but I was very excited. So then we go up, it was like the next day, I think, and we perform a scene on stage, but we do it to picture.
Uh-huh.
And, me being a nerd and like having been the president of my anime club where we would like, sometimes you play the show muted and you like dub over it in real
Uh-huh.
time, like that kind of
Uh-huh.
stuff. Like I sort of had practice. Like I don't want to call it ADR practice because obviously the process in studio is so different. But I was at least familiar with matching picture to
Lowercase
some
ADR,
extent.
right?
Yes, yes, little
Little small
little
tiny letters.
Comic Sans ADR. Yes.
Nice.
So again, I felt like just kind of that practice, that preparation
Yeah.
gave me an advantage because I wasn't thrown off by having to match the picture.
Yeah.
And I remember like they were surprised that I knew how to do reacts intuitively because sometimes, if it's something that you're not trained in or not practiced, sometimes people can balk at reacts because they're just not used to doing it.
Are
So
reacts the same? Is that like efforts or
yeah, but I think when we think of efforts, we think of like battle cries, but like
right.
reacts can be something as small as like a small gasp or a notice, that
Okay.
kind of thing. So it's like that kind of stuff, just like the physical, something that goes along with the physical movement of the character and nonverbal.
Uh-huh.
So, just doing that. And obviously, there are a lot of good people in that top 5 or 6 or whatever it was. So I was like, oh man, I felt pretty good about what I did. I felt really strong in the character type that I had chosen, but you just don't know, right? So
Right.
then, yeah, I found out that I was the winner.
That's
And
amazing. Congrats.
yeah. And it wasn't like you got any like guaranteed part or anything, but you did I think it was like you got a free class at the studio. You got
Mhm.
to meet the casting director who was there, like watching everybody. And you got to, I think it was like you got like a tour and a general audition. So, like with a general audition, they don't have to hire you or put you in anything, but it's kind of like you get to at least read for the casting director and show what you can do.
Mhm.
But because I lived in Alaska, I couldn't really set that up. So basically, what the casting director told me was like, well, yeah, like we like your stuff, but we can't work with you unless you are in the LA area. So, if you move, because I said, well, at the time, like, oh, I'm in college. And then when I graduate, I am planning to move there to do voice work. And so she said, okay, well, contact us when you're there. And then we can arrange, like, your studio tour and your general audition. So, obviously, like, I had to, like, that gave me something to kind of work for
Right.
to move to LA. And
Yeah.
that way I could kind of, email her when I got there and say, like, oh, can I, can I still do that general audition or whatever? And,
Yeah. How long was that
obviously, oh,
how
go
long
ahead.
was that apart?
Well, it's kind of complicated because
Mhm.
I originally moved or thought I was going to move to LA permanently in like 2008,
Uh-huh.
and I only stayed for about a year and a half the first time because it was like when the economy was really bad,
Yeah,
the
that was a
recession
bad
was
time.
happening, and it's kind of like working with one studio, mostly doing anime. It's like I was really grateful for that work experience, but it's kind of like I was getting maybe one job every 3 months,
Mhm.
and it was really hard to find day jobs at the time.
Right.
So I'd kind of like done a few things at different day jobs here and there, but it was just like nobody was really hiring. So, after a while, it's like you don't want to just keep using up your savings. And it just
Right.
wasn't really, I kind of had to admit to myself, like, okay, maybe I wasn't quite ready. It was like I was really wanting to move, and I was like, oh, I like sort of have this in with this studio now. And and I did some stuff. Like I was in a few games and like a handful of shows, but it was just kind of like I couldn't sustain it as my career. Yeah, and I had to admit that to myself. And it's a very
That's a
ego
tough thing.
crushing
Yeah,
moment. Yeah.
absolutely.
But at the same time, I think there were parts of that weren't my fault as well, just like what the economy was. Because if I were able to have some like, some really good side job,
Right.
then it wouldn't have been so hard. But I was also just grateful to kind of get a chance to move back home and just save up money, like working as a barista and, making tips and all that
Wait,
kind of
an
stuff.
actor working as a barista? That's crazy.
Huh, never heard of. And next you're
Never
gonna
heard of
say
it.
I was a server in a restaurant, which I did later.
Oh, that's crazy, Kira. Stop making
Yeah.
stuff up.
But
Yeah,
also because I was still just so passionate about like
yeah,
doing this online work and stuff for independent content creators. So you know, it was hard, like, not gonna lie, to kind of be like, okay, I have to put this stuff on hold for a couple years again, like
right,
any sort of real work. But at the same time, I was like, okay, I know that I can still do all my online stuff. And so I can still act and I can still, you know,
right,
be in media that's released somewhere, even if it's on the internet. And the
right.
internet was, of course, right. It's like now everything's online, like streaming, YouTube, Twitch, like people watch their content online, not so much like on TV and stuff like that. But
Yeah, we don't even have a TV connection. We just everything we have is online.
yeah, same. So, you know, but then I ended up moving at back out there at the end of 2011 just
Uh-huh.
because, I had some more savings and just felt like a little more prepared to give it a go.
When was the contest?
2007.
2007. So then that, and then about a year, year and a half, and then okay, and then right in the middle of a recession. Terrible, but yeah.
Yeah, it just like in hindsight, it just wasn't a good time to move. But at the same time, it was kind of like when you sort of have that in, you don't want to just wait years and years. You
No, of
kind
course
of,
not. Yeah, yeah. So then you moved back in 2011,
yeah, I moved back to LA in 2011 and just gave it another go.
and it worked.
Well, yeah, very slowly. Like my first job out there, I had to drive like an hour each way. And it was
Uh-huh.
just like, to work as a server
So that's in LA, that's like 5 blocks though, right?
yeah, yeah, like I did like so many different jobs. I had day jobs until 2018. So it's,
Uh-huh.
sometimes when I mentor people and they're just like, "Oh, well, I've been doing VO for a year or 2 years and I'm mad that I'm not full time yet." I'm like, "It took me how many years to,
Yeah.
it's not easy, especially in a place like the LA area where the cost of living is so high, and I'm sure, in New York it's even worse."
Right. Right, right. Yeah, and there's so much competition, especially in
So
LA.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
And
lot of
that's the other
talented people.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know that, we want to say, like, oh, we're all unique and nobody else can bring what we bring to the table. And it's like, sure, no one else can bring exactly what we bring to the table. But if you take any role that I would be cast as, I can give you 20 other actresses off the top of my head who could have done just as good of a job, maybe slightly different interpretation. But you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
the harsh truth is that we are all replaceable and we see it happen. Somebody moves away, somebody retires, and they just find a voice match. Like, that's really depressing to say, but I think it's also, we do kind of have to keep that reality in our heads, that it's like, okay, you need to work really hard and you need to be competitive because there's so many other people in your
Mhm.
vocal category. There's so many people who can do what you do.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So, when did you start the voice acting club?
So the voice acting club, the first iteration of it was actually started way back in 2005 on the Newgrounds website,
Uh-huh.
because they had like a forum back then and they had a section called clubs. And people could just kind of be like, "Oh, here's," as long as there wasn't already a club for that topic, you could start one. So of course I'm like, "Oh, I'll start the voice acting club." And um
Mhm.
it was very disorganized because it was just like one thread. You can't edit your posts on there. It was a mess. I'm not going to lie. But at the same time, I think it kind of formed a foundation for what eventually evolved into the VAC today. And eventually, because we just couldn't really do much there, and obviously with none of us being moderators on the site at large, it was just kind of hard because we couldn't really enforce any rules or anything like that. So I went to pro boards and decided to make an independent forum for the
Mhm.
voice acting club, and it was still very, very much kind of focused on flash animation, stuff like that, but people could post whatever projects they wanted. Machinima was getting to be a really big thing at the time, and
Mhm.
so there were a lot of those on there, and yeah, just tons of stuff, audio dramas, what have you. Um,
Mhm.
Back then, obviously, it was just kind of like anything goes. So I would say we didn't really have like kind of the quality filter in a sense that we do to an extent now on the current VAC. But
Uh-huh.
that forum was around for a number of years. But at the same time, it eventually fell off the map because we still had sites like the VAA, and
Uh-huh.
it was like there were other places where people could do that. So it's kind of like, a lot of us just sort of lost interest in maintaining it at the time
Right, and
because
it's a
there were
lot to
other
maintain
sites.
something. It is a
Yeah,
lot.
and there were other sites that kind of serve the purpose already. So we're just like, okay, we don't really need to, have this. So it just sort of like languished. It just kind of like died out.
Right.
Um, but then fast forward to 2016, like around winter 2016, beginning of winter,
Uh-huh.
and I talked to some of the old mods and admins from back in the day who I was still friends with and said, like, "Hey, crazy idea. What would you guys think about rebooting the VAC?" And I was expecting everyone to say, "No, you're crazy. Like, we're not going to do that." And they're like, "Yeah, let's do it." And the reason was because, at that point, the VAA was long gone.
Mhm.
The other sites that sort of tried to come up and fill that void didn't really take off, or they were gone as well. Um, there was a site called Casting Call Club where it was, kind of similar, like a lot of
Right.
online project auditions and stuff, but it didn't have the discussion board aspect of it. It was
Mhm.
just like an audition hosting site, basically. So there was kind of something missing, like a hole we needed to fill, because all these people were like, well, okay, you got started voice acting online. This person got started voice acting online, but how do we do that? There's no central place to kind
Mhm.
of like, for project creators and voice actors to collaborate with each other. So then we decided to relaunch the VAC. And another thing that we wanted to do was have guides and articles where it's kind of like, okay, if you need to make your own demo reel just for the purpose of doing like indie low budget auditions, here's
Mhm.
a guide on how to do that. If you want to, make like a functional website for voice work, here's how to do that. So it also helped too because I was being asked every day, and I'm sure many other actors were like,
Mhm.
"How do you get into voice acting? Do you have any
I'm
tips
just
to
gonna
get
say, how do you get
started?"
into voice? Yeah.
Yeah, and it like the reality is that we just don't, people don't have time to just like write a personal essay like we wish we could.
Right.
But, it's just kind of like there's so much that goes into it, and you don't want to like explain over and over again why it's like, okay, you have to be an actor first and you have to take classes, and just doing anime is not going to pay the bills and all that kind of stuff. So it just made sense to kind of have a central place where you could direct people to and say, hey, here's like a community of resources,
Mhm.
and project creators will post auditions and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Then I think the big thing that made our community take off was couple years after that, like 2018, because the problem was that forums were dying out,
Right.
and at first I didn't want to admit it because it was like, well, I like grew up on forums, like that was the thing, but people
Right.
wanted real time chat. It's why like Facebook groups and all that kind of stuff were so popular. Like people didn't want to go to a message board and post a whole thing and also like, oh no, that's going to live on the internet forever, or like this or that. It's just like people wanted like real time chat, and we tried having like a little chat box on the board, but it just wasn't. It wasn't how like today's young people prefer to communicate. So
Right. Well, you have a
people were talking
Discord
about
now too,
Discord.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the game changer, because people would ask, why don't you guys have a Discord? And I was like, oh, I don't want to like moderate another thing. But I got used to Discord because I was in a Pokemon Go server. So I had
Mhm.
got Discord just to like coordinate with people with raids and like the local Pogo group. And I was like, okay, let me just like look up how to set up a server. And we just kind of like set up a bare bones one at first and said, well, we're trying this out if anyone wants to join it. And that's what people wanted. So people started
Mhm.
flocking to the server, even people who weren't on the boards or were never active on the boards. And, now we have over 10,000 members.
Yeah, I was
So I
gonna
think
say it's
the
huge. I
yeah,
looked at it. There's a lot of members there.
yeah, it's overwhelming for some people, which is why we're like, oh, it's okay to, kind of just like lurk around and get the feel for things, because
Yeah.
it is overwhelming. But and we still have the boards up mainly for like the guides and the other things that we want more permanent. But I think people just really like being able to ask a question in real time, and whoever's around will answer it for them.
Mhm. Nice. Yeah, it's been a nice resource. I've hung out there a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah. And I've hung out on actually the boards as well. So
Cool. Yeah, the boards are a little dead these days, but who try to tell people like, don't worry, it's all in Discord, so it's a very
right.
active community. It's just this is what the young people want, and we're not going to fight
Right. This is what the young people want. We're not gonna fight that.
it.
Because they're young and they've got vigor and we don't.
Yep.
Exactly. So that's cool. And that's just Voice Acting Club on Discord is the name of the server, right?
Yeah, so if you go to voiceactingclub.com, there will be a link to the Discord, the boards, the articles, pretty much everything.
Great. Okay. Cool. How did you succeed so much in VO?
Well, it's weird because, I still don't necessarily consider myself successful, because
Right.
I think everybody has this idea of success
Sure.
that's always like, it's always just out of reach, right? So
Right.
it's like,
Always.
I can think of things where it's like, I would just be happy if I did this. I would be successful if I did this. And then it's like when we achieve those goals, it's always something else. So,
Right.
I feel like that's sort of normal, that you're never going to feel like you made it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I think just like practice, perseverance, like it takes a long time for
Yeah.
most people. I think a lot of I wrote articles about this too if anyone is interested, but I think it's really easy to kind of look at other people on social media and say, well, they succeeded so fast. They succeeded overnight. Like I wrote a whole article on like the myth of overnight success
Right.
and why it's rarely a thing. You always have exceptions. You have those unicorns who is just like one day they're somehow in everything. But the reality is, even because, okay, like fans in particular, like the general anime fan community, they
Yeah.
tend to think, well, if I haven't heard of you, if you're not in this popular show, then you're nobody, you don't exist.
Right.
So it's kind of like for example, a lot of people even said that I came out of nowhere when I booked 2B from Near Automata, but by then it's like I had been voice acting for well over a decade, like at
You
least
were
if you
in
count the
Sailor
hobby
Moon for
years.
God's sake.
Well, that was after because it was the reboot, but,
Oh, okay.
or the redub.
The
Yeah.
redub Sailor Moon, but still.
But I'd done, like,
Hello.
a lot of, I'd still done shows, I'd done video games. There were video games that I was the lead in before that, but because those projects just kind of flew under the radar, it was like nobody knew who I was, which is totally fine. But at the same time, it's like, somebody could look at that from the outside and be like, well, she just got this big role and blew up overnight. It's like, no, I was acting for years before that. I did all this other stuff, all these other projects. I, invested in demos and training and
I served a hell of a lot of
equipment.
coffee.
Yeah. So I think it's like, you don't really see like the journey. Like another friend of mine, because people hadn't heard of her until, like, some people hadn't heard of her until this like specific role that she did. They were like, oh, she's like new. And she's like, no, I've been acting since I was a child, like
Mhm,
even longer
mhm.
than in my case. So it was kind of like, I think you don't really know people's journey unless you dive into it. So everybody's kind of just like working as hard as they can and slowly, it's not like there's one moment where it's like, okay, you're suddenly successful. I mean, maybe if somebody books like a huge commercial campaign or prelay show and then it's like, okay, if you get that like right out of the gate, then I guess you could say you're successful or whatever. But,
Right,
it's so, I think career success is less about did I get this really big role and more about do I have career longevity? Am I sustaining myself? Am I booking work regularly? Am I supporting myself? And everybody has a different idea of what success looks like.
right,
But the consistency of the work, I think, is a huge thing because you can be the lead in a huge project. You can be the title character in, maybe some big game or show or what have you. But it's like when that project ends, what's your next job? Like, do you have other
exactly.
work lined up? We can't really coast on, unless you're like a celebrity, I guess. You can't really just like coast on stuff you did before because it's like, okay, you got paid your session fees for that. What are you going to do next?
Right, yeah, you always have to have something else. What have you done to ensure your own longevity?
Um, One thing that I try to do is just like diversify my income and my sources of auditions as much as possible.
Mhm,
So, if anyone's just relying on maybe one or two studios or talent rosters to send them auditions, or if they have an agent and they're just relying on the agent, for example, it's, things are going to be slow everywhere and then you're going to feel bad and you're going to be like, oh man, what am I going to do, and financial insecurity. So I think the goal, and of course it's easier said than done and I'm
mhm,
aware of this, is to slowly get on different casting directors radars, get on different studios internal talent rosters.
mhm,
Basically you want to have different sources sending you auditions so that even if things are slow at one studio, it's like, okay, well, this casting director over here is casting a new series and they're sending me an audition for that. And so I think that's a huge thing. And I always try to audition for stuff. Like, I mean, if I think I'm really not right for a character, then I'll pass on an audition. But, for the most part, I try not to be too picky.
mhm,
And, I think obviously if somebody like feels uncomfortable with the content or, they're just not appropriate for the character, like ethnically or this or that, then of course there's like certain lines that you have to draw where you're like, okay, I'm not going to read for this. But, you know, I think in general, even if something's not, oh, this is my dream project, this is something I'm so passionate about as an artist, because sometimes it's like it's a job, it's work, and sometimes we might audition for work on things that maybe we're not like super passionate about or
mhm,
creatively fulfilled by, but
mhm.
that's okay because we want to pay the bills. You never know, you might work on this random poorly written low budget project with this one casting director and later they go on to cast for like a some major video game and they remember you, like you never
Yeah,
know.
like, "I really like working with Kira, let's go give her a call."
Yeah, so I think it is really important to just do your best to to treat every job seriously, treat it like it's important and be professional and try to do good work. And that way it can kind of build relationships for the future.
Nice. Any suggestions for new VAs that you haven't hit on already? I don't mean that you're hitting on VAs, I mean any suggestions you haven't hit on.
I think a really good thing is just to kind of observe and practice and read out loud
Uh,
because cold reading, especially if you want to do games and dubbing and a lot of character work in general, you have to have cold reading down. Like that is just, now just because of the pandemic, we're getting sent our scripts via email maybe like the night before or the same day. But normally it's like we don't see that till we go in the booth.
Mhm.
So it's not like, a play where you get to like really break down the character and rehearse and all this kind of stuff because you're not memorizing lines or anything. You're just kind of, sometimes you don't even know who you're playing until you get into the booth.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like, I think you have to be prepared to do whatever they throw at you. If they're suddenly like, hey, can we make this character British? You got to be able to be like, sure, no problem, because they might throw curveballs at you last minute sometimes.
Right.
And just, yeah, practice reading out loud all the time, practice acting with your friends. Like, I think a common, I don't want to say like mistake, but something that I see a lot of people doing these days is they feel very pressured to jump into the career side of it head first, and they
Mhm.
don't allow themselves to play and have fun. So right away they're like, oh, I got to do my Twitter marketing, and I've got to like, have like all my graphics done for my website, and I got to make my LinkedIn, and I got to try to market myself, and I got to network and stuff. It's like, okay, you can network and market till you're blue in the face, but if you don't have the skills as a performer to back it up,
Mhm. Right.
nobody's going to hire you. You
Right.
maybe can get auditions by like knowing the right people, but it's like, but will they actually hire you? Will their clients want to cast you? Like, no. So,
Especially will they hire you twice?
right. So I think before putting so much focus on the marketing and the I got to make this a career, I got to make money, because it's kind of like, would you pay for your skills at the level you are at? Like, sometimes you have to be honest with like, okay, maybe I need more practice, maybe I need more training before I can,
Mhm.
jump into like commanding these kind of rates that these big actors in the industry do or whatever. And there's
Mhm.
no shame in saying like, hey, I'm going to make a project for fun with my friends. Hey, I'm going to do this student project that maybe doesn't pay much, but it's a good experience, and it's a creative collaboration. It's a chance to work with a director, work on a deadline, all that kind of stuff, so that when you do get those bigger jobs, you can be prepared and
Mhm.
not feel like you're jumping into the deep end or whatever. So,
Mhm.
and of course I say that and always caution, like, when I say like, work on low budget projects at first, I mean like student projects, like passion collaborative stuff with small creators, like super indie stuff. I don't mean like, obviously don't let yourself get taken advantage of. Don't,
Right.
I really have issues with some of these online freelancer sites because I think they're very exploitative.
They're
And
very exploitative, yes.
yeah, so never, don't, again, if a commercial client wants to hire you for a big thing, then yes, of course, like charge them properly. But if you want to work with like small creators, student projects, people who just don't, can't pay much, I think there is value in that. And sometimes people just want to jump straight to the top without
Mhm.
having this skills or foundation.
Yeah, to get that foundation in place, take acting classes, do all of that.
Yeah, and even if you don't have, because I know, like, especially in our current economy and with the pandemic, that classes and coaching and equipment, it's something that a lot of people can't afford right now. And
Right,
that's
it's
totally
expensive.
understandable. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And you do, there is a certain thing where, yes, if you want to be a professional voice actor, you do have to invest a certain amount of money in some point, whether that's your demos, home studio, some kind of coaching or training. But in the meantime, there's stuff that you can do for free. You can go to the Voice Acting Club website. You can read my articles. You can go
Mhm.
to iwannabeavoiceactor.com, D. Bradley Baker's site. You can go to like the Voice Acting Mastery podcast. Voice Actors Network, I think, and Voiceover Collective have resources, GVAA. Like, there's so many different free resources online that you guys have on the internet now that I didn't have when I first started, and I wish I
Right.
did. So, and of course, like, think critically, like, you want to be careful where you're getting your information from. Don't fall for these like get rich quick and work from home overnight classes. Like, that's just scammy.
Yeah.
But if you can, like, try to learn from reputable teachers. Some of them might have like free webinars or something. Just observe good performances and try recording on your own. Even if you can't afford recording equipment yet, you can just like record stuff on your phone just to practice, like read a comic book out loud or something. And it's like, there's definitely stuff that you can do to just sort of learn.
Mhm. Yeah. There's lots of webinars. I mean, if you can go to Gravy for the Brain, they have a lot of webinars. I guess if you just pay $35 a month for that, they have
Yeah.
all over the place. There's GVAA, which is I think closer to like $60 a month, and then there's obviously Voice Acting Club. Um, and you guys have people doing things there too, right?
Yeah, like we do have sometimes voice coaches will come in and do like a free Q&A. So if people are like, "Oh, I think I'm interested in coaching this person, or coaching with this person, but I want to learn more about their philosophy and stuff like that." Some of our coaches will just come in and be like, "Hey, here's I'll do a little like open Q&A session and people can ask me stuff." Or sometimes voice actors will come in who are, more established in the industry and be like, "Hey, if you guys want to ask me like questions about acting technique and that kind of stuff." And that's all free. Like, a big part of the voice acting club was that I didn't want anything to be paywalled. So
Uh-huh.
obviously, like sometimes we'll have links that people post to, "Hey, here's these workshops and stuff that obviously cost money, but it's a free and open community with resources that anybody can share with each other. People are very giving with knowledge. Like if somebody has a question about something, or they're like, "Hey, I got asked to sign this contract that I'm not sure is legit. Can anyone help me?" Like, people are always willing to jump in and help. So I think, it is really important to have those free resources.
Hmm.
And just as, of course, it's important to study with teachers if you can. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from that. I think it's also important to just kind of have information in communities that are easily accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for doing that. That's pretty amazing. And it's, like we said, it's a big community. So that's pretty awesome that you
Yeah,
provide that. Um, do you want to do some reading?
sure.
Okay, let's have some fun.
All right.
Okay. So, do you have the copy in the chat?
I do.
Okay. So maybe if you want to talk about your process and what you're thinking about before you read it, and then read it however you like, and then do however else you like.
Sure. So what's funny is that I might even like mess up on this because I don't do a lot of commercial work. I would love to, but I just don't really get access to commercial auditions. Most of my background and my connections is character work.
Mhm,
So I did do some like commercial coaching recently, and I've taken commercial classes. I just got a new commercial demo done, which I haven't posted yet, but I will probably soon.
mhm,
Um, so it's actually like really interesting because the way that I would approach this, I don't know, it's just kind of like you use your instinct, I guess, like
mhm,
after you've been doing this a long time. Like I can look at this copy and say, "Okay, here's probably what I would do." But I think with any, whether it's commercial, character, what have you, it's like it's always important to be believable. Like, does the audience believe you? So one thing that I've noticed they don't want from everything that I'm hearing with commercials is the really announcery stuff, like you
right.
heard in the 90s or whatever. So they don't want like, "Lyft is a lot more than just a car ride." Yeah, you heard me, because it sounds like somebody shouting at you. It's people don't
Right.
connect with it. So they want something that sounds like a relatable person that they could talk to. And a lot of times copy is very salesy. So
I know
it's
it's funny,
hard.
right? We want it conversational, but it's gonna be that no one in their fucking right mind would ever actually say in a conversation.
Right? It's like, "Hey, did you know that you can save if you switch to this insurance or whatever?" It's
Yeah.
like you don't say that to
"Hey."
your friend.
Right, exactly. "Did you know?" And yet, that's what we do to practice, right? We'd, like, picture a friend in front of us or a parent or something and then think about that and then say, "Well, let me tell you about," and then Tide, for example.
Yeah. And a lot of times with copy like this, they're going to have specs at the top where they say kind of like the general age range, the general vibe that they want to go for. Just looking at this copy without any specs, I would say that how I would probably approach this is sort of like the millennial sound. Like I would
Mhm,
be, maybe a girl in her 20s being like, "Hey, did you know about this thing?" And sometimes it's okay if I want to add a little millennial vocal fry, as I call it. And it's more like chill and laid back, like because with my character background, I would kind of want to read something like this super perky, but I know that that's not what they would want in the
Right.
casting room. They'd want something that's more like, "Hey, I'm just a chill friend telling you about this cool thing."
That was a great voice right there.
And also I think the other thing is like even when you have copy that's or you have a read that's more understated like that for something like a commercial, you still need to find kind of layers and levels and performance and stuff. Like if I'm directing people on demos, for example, one thing that I always try to tell them is to find layers in the performance, because if you have three sentences that all sound the same. They're on the same like emotional level, the same projection, the same everything. It's it's like redundant, you know. It just takes up space that like for anything, whether it's a demo, a commercial, you want to capture the audience's attention, and people have short attention spans, right? So,
Mhm, mhm.
you know, how can we make this intriguing given those parameters?
Yeah, well, go for it.
All right. So we'll see if I can, you know, carry all that stuff that I just mentioned. All right. Lyft is a lot more than just a car ride. Yeah, you heard me right. Shared rides, bikes, scooters, fancy cars, public transit, and more. And they're all available with your Lyft app. We're always happy to pick you up, but we can help you get there more ways than you thought. Download the Lyft app today and get going.
I totally believe that girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. She sounds like, you know what she sounds like? She sounds like the Saturn buyer from the 90s. You know, do you remember the Saturn ads back then when they had that
Not
kind of like,
sure.
"Hey, this is my first car," and you know, yeah.
But I want to do an exercise now and
Yes.
say, just to show how there's so many different ways that you can interpret this. Because what if instead of that like cool millennial girl, I was like an authoritative mom who's also a businesswoman, and she's like really thinking about savvy ways for her family to get around.
Uh-huh.
And it's going to be totally different. So she might be like, Lyft is a lot more than just a car ride. Yep, you heard me right. Shared rides, bikes, scooters, fancy cars, public transit, and more. And they're all available with your Lyft app. We're always happy to pick you up, but we can help you get there more ways than you thought. Download the Lyft app today and get going.
Yeah, that's very mom. You've got a good mom in your pocket.
I'm a cat mom.
Oh, yeah? Me too. So,
Nice.
I have 2. How many do you have?
5.
You're a cat lady. That's awesome. Hello,
I mean,
Kira cat
technically,
lady.
I have like between 4 and 5 because one is a stray who kind of goes in and out. So I say like 4.5 cats.
4-ish.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, do you wanna do some fun reads on that?
Sure.
You just player's choice. Anything you wanna do, anything,
Okay, so I
and
will
as
do
many as you like.
a here's what's fun, but here's what is not gonna get cast.
Yes.
So if I were to approach this as a generic anime girl, which again would not be what they want unless they were doing a parody ad, then, you know, again, this is fun, but I had to get away from this read to learn to do commercials. Lyft is a lot more than just a car ride. Yeah, you heard me right. Shared rides, bikes, scooters, fancy cars, public transit, and more. And they're all available with your Lyft app. We're always happy to pick you up, but we can help you get there more ways than you thought. Download the Lyft app today and get going.
That is classic anime girl.
Yup.
Nice. Um, can you do like a monster type?
Sure. Lyft is a lot more than just a car ride. You heard me right. Shared rides, bikes, scooters, fancy cars, public transit, and more. Something like that.
Yeah, that's fun. Nice. Anything else you wanna do on it? Anything
Oh,
tickle your fancy?
um, another thing that they don't really cast, but could just be fun is like the super like seductive kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, like the sexy video game heroine vibe or something like that.
Yeah.
We're always happy to pick you up, but we can help you get there more ways than you thought. Download the Lyft app today and get going.
That could be like for Uber Black, right? You know? It's like,
Right?
"'Cause you know we're sexy and you know you wanna ride with us."
Right?
Nice. Cool. Um, any audition suggestions for newbies?
Don't overthink it. That's a big thing that comes up on the server is there's some people who just spend so long analyzing the copy and just doing it take after take and like really just stressing over it. And the end result is that it sounds really rehearsed and not authentic and not spontaneous. And I think it kind of, you know, it can actually work against you to over prepare. Now, I'm
Mhm.
not just saying like throw out your first take and send that off, but I think, you know, there's kind of a realistic balance. And obviously if it's something where you're like, this is my dream role, it's for this really big thing, you're going to spend a little more time trying to break down the sides as best as you can or whatever. But you know the other reality is that if you're like a full-time working pro, you might have a lot of auditions to get through in a day, so you don't have the luxury of spending an hour on each audition. Like, it's just not possible. So I think it is important to kind of have that element of
Mhm.
like acting instinct to where you can just trust your choices going in.
Mhm.
Um, I usually like it's not a hard and fast rule, and I know everyone has a different process, but I typically like if I'm doing a character audition, I will, read the breakdown, read the side, like just look over the side so I can see
Mhm.
where the scene is going or what the lines are, and I will do maybe 3 takes of each line with slight variations, and then I'll go and listen back and choose my favorite of each to send as my audition. And if I still, if I'm hearing those 3 takes and I'm still like, oh, I should do this, I know what to do now, then I'll maybe record a couple more and pick one from that to put in. But it's like for the most part, I'm not
Mhm.
sending like, or I'm not spending hours and hours on refining that audition. um I think the
Right.
other thing that new people tend to do sometimes is they send a bunch of takes in when they don't need to.
Yeah.
I know everybody has kind of a different philosophy on this, but even with like the few times I've helped with casting stuff and this and that, I would prefer people just send their best take, unless they ask for something else. Or unless they can really provide a different interpretation of the character that's workable. If you're just like slightly emphasizing a different word or slightly doing a higher pitch in the voice, I don't think you need to send a second take for that. Like, a director's going to know that any decent actor, you can just be like, hey, hit this word instead, and they can do it. Like, there's no reason to send like 5 takes of an audition, and it's
Yeah.
just going to like waste their time listening to all that. So I think it's generally best, in my opinion, to just, unless they ask for more or the copy's really short, or like, one has an accent, or it's, you're just not sure, oh, do they want like it bigger, do they want it like super cinematic, like there's some different times when it could be like helpful to send another take. But I think generally, if you're gonna send 2 takes that are really similar, just pick your best and send that.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Um, Sit or stand?
Stand, unless you're doing like a long form narration, or if you have like a medical issue or something like that, then it's obviously whatever's more comfortable for you. I think if you can stand, especially when doing like video game work and animation work, it'll be really helpful, just with like posture. And also, I always tell people to kind of physicalize as much as they can. I know it's hard because you're in this small space and you're kind of combined with what you can do with your body, but I
Mhm.
tell people, especially for like battle efforts and stuff like that, to try to physicalize in some little way at least.
Mhm. Okay. Self-promotion time. Although we did talk about a lot of stuff, but if there's anything you really wanna, um, hit hard, just here now's the time.
Yeah, I mentioned before that voiceactingclub.com is my website. I'm also fairly active on Twitter. And then I have like my website as well, which is just like my name.com. Um,
Is that the
that's
same on
and
Twitter? You're at Kara Buckland?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and that's pretty much it.
And that's Kira with an R, right? Cool. All right. And then the 2 games you had were, I wrote them down somewhere so I could mention them, and now I can't find where I
Yeah,
write them
I
down.
can I can type things out if that's
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kira. It's been really a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and have a great week.
You too.
You've been listening to Voiceover. How did you do it? At www.voiceoverpodcast.com with me, Ian Kleinfeld. You can watch the video to all our podcasts at voiceoverpodcast.com/YouTube. The background track is 1959 by my alter ego Max Rocket, and you can find that and other songs at www.maxrocketmusic.com. Remember to like, subscribe, write a review, and all that good stuff on whatever podcast streaming service you're listening to, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.